Coming up, with the NBA trade deadline set for 3 p.m. on Thursday, Doug and I answer the question, what should the Brooklyn Nets do with Kevin Durant and the surrounding roster, and how willing should they be to accomplish those goals by the end of the buzzer?
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings from DraftKings to FanDuel. He's got you covered. I'm Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast, my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms, and let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/Locked On today to get started. And Doug, with that deadline, man, looming large, we are going to talk about some other moves the Nets could make, what it means for their future, but front and center, right off the top, Kevin Durant and where this organization stands with their lone superstar talent.
Yeah, it's been sort of bandied about on low levels about like where the Nets stand with Durant here heading into the trade deadline. I would say back in mid-December when we were just thinking the team looked unstoppable, this would have felt completely unheard of to even be discussing. What's that?
Saw it coming.
Yeah, like just there would have been completely unheard of to think about discussing this at the trade deadline. Again, as a reminder that we talked about a few times, life comes at you very fast in the NBA, and there's just situations can change sort of like on a dime. That is basically what's happened for the Nets here. A little bit of a slow burn with the injuries and to Durant specifically, and then the Simmons, and obviously Kyrie asked for the trade, and it's been sort of like a slower train coming down the track here. But again, we don't have to look back very far to where you're like, holy cow, this team looks unstoppable. Rolling on all cylinders, everyone's playing great. And now, depending on when you're listening this, we're recording live on YouTube 8 p.m. We're less than 24 hours to the trade deadline, and we're even entertaining the idea that the Nets could trade Kevin Durant. Like, whether we think it's likely or not is actually neither part nor parcel. It's more like, I can't even believe we're discussing it.
Yeah.
But we have to discuss it because it's been sort of trial ballooned out there a little bit. Durant's been pretty radio silent here. A few people have just sort of reported that other teams are interested, or at least they feel like they can make phone calls. And that, frankly, is just a scary situation if you're a Nets fan, regardless almost of what happens here going into Thursday, 3 p.m.
And so, obviously, following the Kyrie Irving trade, it certainly makes things look different than we go back to the summer with the initial trade request from Kevin Durant before they ultimately said, hey, we'll put your name out there, but we know what the price tag is on him. Do you think that it changes the Brooklyn Nets perspective now, not having Kyrie Irving, not having the guaranteed number 2 on this roster, to say, well, the price tag is still high, as it should be, but our philosophy and our outlook has to have shifted in some way here, because it just isn't the same anymore. This isn't when there was James Harden. It isn't when there was Kyrie Irving. It is when you don't have any optimism around Ben Simmons. And even though you got pieces back in Spencer Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith back onto this roster, it's just the franchise is in, it sounds insane to say it, as uncertain waters as they've ever been in the Kevin Durant era.
Yeah, in some ways, I'm actually a little grateful that there is a trade deadline here, right? There's a world, there's again, in the old, cannot believe we're talking about this, but here we are. It's actually probably good for the Nets that 3 p.m. time runs out and they just can't even entertain it again till the summer, because I think in this scenario, this has all happened so fast that they're going to probably end up possibly getting saved by that timeline, or at least what is probably going to happen is that less teams can kind of enter the fray and get all their chips moving around in time. Because, a trade for Kevin Durant is no small thing. You need to have massive assets on the table. You need to have your own clear vision of a franchise, and you need to have really just an absolute steady hand, because we've already seen it once. The Nets are going to extract a massive price or at least ask for one. So I think there's probably some world where this 3 p.m. trade deadline, to some degree works in the Nets' favor if their goal is to keep Kevin Durant. I'm worried that Durant has been really quiet here.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was lots of chances to come out and be like, hey, I'm excited for this. I'm excited for that. He's a really active guy on Twitter. He's been kind of radio silent there. Like it doesn't
nothing
scream
about Spencer
excitement.
Dinwiddie, nothing about Dorian Finney-Smith.
This is what I mean. Nothing screams excitement. Now it doesn't scream negativity necessarily. We haven't had a formal trade request here, but the part where he maybe is super excited about the future here is probably in doubt. And so, heading into this trade deadline, depending on when you're listening to it, I think the Nets find themselves in a state of flux to either have to prove something for him, having discussions about what the future looks like with him.
Mm-hmm.
And we've already been down the road once over the summer where he's already asked. So it's clearly on the table that he would ask again. The reason we know is he already did it once.
Right.
So, and then just, in the end, they were able to make things work. It's unclear to me that they would be able to do round 2 on that here, especially with Kyrie leaving. And if Durant thinks that the Kyrie leaving is on the Nets doorstep here, right? For the reason Kyrie left, no max contract, no 4 years, none of this other stuff. I don't know, man. And that's the part where maybe sometime around Thursday, you do hear a massive move is going to happen with him.
Well, and it's interesting too, because you say radio silence, and there's been, as far as the rumor mill goes, radio silence on the idea of speculative trades. Now, the laundry list of teams that are kind of lined up for it, we know Phoenix has always been lurking in the shadows for an opportunity like this. But as far as league-wide goes, I was in, we do our NBA, water coolers with all the hosts and stuff and just catch up with one another. And Koo from Locked On Pistons, who doesn't have really a lot of excitement or joy on his end, he was expressing the frustration to me. He's like, when are they going to make a decision about this? Because it's holding up the rest of the league and trades can happen. And the only thing that we've heard to this point, as we're saying on Wednesday night here, is that the Lakers, Timberwolves, and Utah Jazz are in this 3-team kind of conversation around D'Angelo Russell and Connolly, and obviously getting Westbrook's contract off the Lakers. And those 3 teams and the players being talked about were never associated in anything that the Brooklyn Nets were going to do. So it kind of makes sense that the one you're hearing about right now isn't impacted by what's going on in Brooklyn. But I would say probably 20. I mean, listen, every team would think about it if Kevin Durant became available, but at least a third of the league probably has real viability in getting into those discussions around Kevin Durant before the deadline. So on the one hand, you'd say no news is good news. On the other hand, like you just said, all of a sudden 2:55 p.m., your ears perk up because something's been getting quietly worked on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and just for point of clarity here, we're recording this at 8 p.m. This news comes flying in. The Lakers, Jazz, and Timberwolves did just complete that trade that Adam was just referring to. They actually just finalized it, and that is D'Angelo Russell, Malik Beasley, and Vanderbilt are going to Los Angeles. It's a pretty big haul here for the Lakers. Yeah. Russell Westbrook and a first are going to Utah. Mike Conley and a second are going to Minnesota. It's a pretty big improvement there for the Lakers. So anyway, But long story short is, there's some teams, I don't know if any of those teams, like you said, would have been involved into the Kevin Durant mix at all. They clearly wouldn't have been. Now, would any team, any trade involving Durant would almost definitely involve other teams, right? Like you start moving guys like this around that are big. Other teams want to wet their beak on something within these things, or
just floating around here. Maybe I'd grab a little something for me.
Exactly. So, so to some degree, it eliminates that from the mix for these guys. But yeah, you're right. Like I've heard that same thing is that this kind of puts some of the rest of the league on hold because they need to know if it ultimately is going to be available. As we close that, because we want to talk about some other possible deals there on the trade. Right now, 8:15 p.m. Wednesday evening. Do you think Kevin Durant gets moved at the deadline?
No. My instinct right now is no. The Brooklyn Nets have taught me to not trust my instincts over the last 4 years. And I will say, and you can give your feedback, obviously, but then come up next, it's like, how does this Laker trade inform maybe what Brooklyn should be doing in pursuing another star? Because it is kind of informative around what is possible out there on the market. Do you see this as being he's still here? And what's the percentage? Because I'm 65-70% that Durant is here through the deadline.
Yeah, I'm like 95 probably. Yeah, I'm pretty high. I think that and too, like anytime some of these bigger pieces get moved around, like not like D'Angelo Russell, some massive piece, but every time one of these other pieces gets moved, I think that like it kind of decreases the likelihood, because you actually, a lot of times you need other stuff like this to kind of work into the mix. I think at this point too, and because I do want to talk about like if Durant doesn't move, like what are some possibilities? Because I think there's some other possibilities that the Nets need to consider here moving into the trade deadline. But in all actuality, I think that there's just like, it's just too short to kind of reference what I said before. I think it's too short of a period of time for other teams to kind of rally everything together. This stuff's always easier in the offseason. There's just more time to flesh out the draft piece of it. There's more time to see sort of what young guys are like. I just think from that standpoint, it doesn't happen. Thankfully, like I don't want him to get traded really bad, like, really, really badly. So I'm going to put it really high that it doesn't happen. But again, even allowing for any percentage of this is not an amazing feeling, because if this was December 15th, we wouldn't even have brought it up. We wouldn't even have brought this up. Like the trade deadline was January 1st. It only would have been what the Nets can get. Like the fact that they're talking about it all going the other way is totally bonkers.
So coming up here in a second, we'll talk about the Toronto Raptors as the sample size, the rumored Pascal Siakam trade, what has been discussed in terms of the package they want back in return, and if we assume that Kevin Durant is here, how far should the Brooklyn Nets be willing to go to add talent around him?
All right, before we get into that, we're really excited about our new sports betting partner for the Locked On Networks, the number one sports book in America, and that is FanDuel. You know FanDuel, but especially if you're new to FanDuel, it's even better. They have so many great features that make betting on sports very fun and very easy. Download FanDuel right now so you can bet on Super Bowl 57. That's the one coming up on Sunday. With a no sweat first bet, you get the $3,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. FanDuel lets you bet on everything from the money line to point spreads or who will score a touchdown. Go into FanDuel right now. I'm kind of talking myself in. I think I said this yesterday too. I'm talking to myself into a full-on ground game for the Eagles.
Here we go.
Right? They just lean on the run the entire time. We're going to parlay a couple things together here. We're going to go Jalen Hurts anytime touchdown scorer. We're going to go Miles Sanders anytime touchdown scorer. Maybe we'll go some unders on some of those like Mahomes passing yards and maybe the receiving yards too, because it's just we're gonna grind this baby out. Just some of what's available over at our friends on FanDuel. FanDuel Sportsbook app is safe, secure, very easy to use. Best of all, you can get paid your winnings instantly. Join FanDuel today at FanDuel.com/lockedon to claim your no sweat first bet on Super Bowl 57. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL.
Okay, so one thing I wanted to say before we get into the Pascal Siakam and really just the talent acquisition portion of our discussion around the deadline and what Sean Marks is going to look to do. I did just want to mention too that I almost entirely agree with you that the restrictions are on anything with Kevin Durant make it difficult. Always more time, have deeper discussions. The one thing that the Nets could benefit from is the old panic move from another franchise. Like, never discount the idea that when you hear there's unrest in Brooklyn and that Kevin Durant may be thinking about wanting to move on, sometimes you go, well, guess what? Anything, everything. You tell me what you want, and I'll tell you how excited I am to give it to you. Now, whether or not that ends up occurring, it's far less likely than it going the other way. But I do think, like, remember, it was just in the offseason when he requested and then rescinded it. So most teams probably looked and said, now that's it. You know, he's under contract. We missed our opportunity. Then Kyrie gets traded. Now we don't know what's happening here. Sometimes the best time to strike is now, before Brooklyn gets to make other moves and other decisions to try to solidify things around Kevin Durant. Not my ideal scenario, just saying I've seen it happen before. Like, we've seen trades like this happen, which I think sometimes, just like the Kyrie one, are out of desperation.
You mean desperation they trade Durant away, or desperation they make a bad move to bring someone else
come to the table and they just say, hey, whatever you want, we'll give it to you because now is the time. I don't want you to figure things out at the deadline and add talent. I don't want you to get to the off season and find ways to shed contracts and make other moves. We're going to give you anything that you want right now in this moment so that we don't have to speculate potentially on competing with every other team in the league for his services in the off season too.
Yeah, right. Like, you strike while the iron's hot when you know the bidders are fewer. Yeah, I think there's a world where that's the case. I still think that, like, the Nets are probably going to try to be buyers here, like in some fashion. I think the question is what fashion, right? Like, what fashion they see themselves as moving in here. if we're able to eliminate the desperation on the form another move, and I think that move would have to be still like blow the Nets out of the water. Like it would have to be so much. And I just don't know if the teams that are vying for him right now actually kind of have enough, like the Suns, right? So or want to part with enough to actually be able to get there, and like enough would be like Ayton or something, right? Or like Ayton plus tons of picks and Bridges, Ayton and Bridges plus tons of, like, I don't think they're wanting to do that. And so I think that's going to help the Nets. And then it begs the question, like, where do they go? Like, do they make a swing for a Toronto move, right? There's a reason Toronto's been mentioned in everything, and then kind of no one knows, right? Like Toronto's so weird right now. It's very hard. This is why they get talked about with every scenario.
You know who also doesn't know what's going on in Toronto? Toronto. Like you've heard everybody, like they're older veteran players, but also they're young guys. Everyone except for Scotty Barnes has been talked about and discussed and rumored. So I think that they're kind of, swinging with both sides of the fence here, potentially on whether or not could we bring in somebody and kind of change things. We've actually heard a little bit of a Jakob Poeltl discussion potentially finding his way into Toronto and something that they need. So is Toronto selling? Are they buying? But the rumor around Pascal Siakam and what seems to be, if there was ever going to be a move made there, what's been holding it up is that Toronto is saying Nick Claxton. That is the centerpiece to any trade that we want to accomplish. Let's just brass tacks it here on those discussions. If you're sitting here and they're saying it's Pascal Siakam for 2 or 3 first-round picks and Nicholas Claxton, and then you got to throw in other stuff to make the money match. And I know you looked at the trade machines here to make sure it lines up. Are you pulling that trigger? Like, are you going that far in this moment? It's hard for me to debate it when you have Kevin Durant, and I think you and I will probably disagree on the decision that should get made here.
Yeah, I am of two minds about this, and we talked about this briefly yesterday, but it begs another question because it does. This is the kind of move that you have to at least consider, because if you think that, like, to win championships, you need to have really consolidated talent like that. And that is really the way to win the championship, is like, you have to have really consolidated talent, or at worst, like super high end talent, and then like no holes at all. Like that would be the Warriors kind of thing. It's like they have one superstar and they have way above perfect guys that match everything else. Right. After that, to win championships, you basically like need 2 great players to be able to, you need one of the greatest players. You need one of those. They have that. That's have that with Durant. And then behind that, you need like another top 20 player pretty much at minimum, and then a bunch of other pieces that kind of work, right? So that's like kind of the formula. That's the case for maybe bringing in a guy like Siakam, because you consolidate your talent into like 2 guys, and then you work out the rest of the pieces. If you think Siakam is that guy, I'm not positive he is, but let's just say for the sake of argument here that he is kind of trending toward like all NBA-ish kind of guy, could be the second best guy on a really good team. Like, I think you can talk yourself into that. So from a talent consolidation standpoint, I actually think that there's a case to be made for it. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And like what you would have to, because you would immediately get worse in the place you're already not amazing in, which is like, size, right? And so, and that would, you'd have no center. So it'd be almost impossible to think about even contending, because you would just have, it's not like they have another guy they can kind of bring in to stem the tide here. So you'd be sending out sort of like the one other guy that's kind of irreplaceable on your defense, right? In Claxton. The way to make it work for specifically Siakam is Claxton plus Curry plus Harris is like that's the exact number in salary, right? It's like almost to the dollar. So the salaries would work perfectly right there. And the Nets would probably have to include some compensation, though. Claxton's so good, I'm not sure how much additional compensation they would need to send, right? In that scenario, like Claxton's really, really good and super cheap.
You think keep what? You think one first round pick?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Siakam's got one more year left in the salary. I don't want to underrate Claxton here, because he's still, again, very young and very good. So, and would fit, like, if they got rid of Siakam, would kind of fit sort of what they're doing over there to some degree too. So this one's close to me. I think from a talent consolidation standpoint, I would really consider it. And I get that the fan base would probably lose their minds, which is also hilarious, because if you said 2 months ago that you could trade Claxton for Siakam, people would have just gone to Claxton's house and packed his bags for him,
Yep.
right, and drove him to the airport. And we're not in that situation either. But this is also what it takes good players to get good players. So you don't get to have it both ways all the time.
And that's what, so, it's funny because the picks thing does matter here. However I feel about Nicholas Claxton as a player and his talent, that does factor into this if you're talking about a deal of this level. But the other, I think, really hard part about it is, say even I was willing to part with Claxton, which starts to have this deja vu kind of vibe around the Jared Allens, the Karis LeVerts, like all the guys that, and none of them ever had. Right now, Claxton, I think, is surpassing potentially the upside of a Jared Allen in terms of where his ceiling could be versus what the talent is in this moment. But I do have some of that little bit of that deja vu of like, here goes some of the young guys, like here goes some of the talent. But the other problem is, if it ends up costing you most of your draft capital, there's not a guarantee that Siakam with Durant and no Claxton. Okay, now you have Dinwiddie, you have Dorian Finney-Smith, and the rest. There is no guarantee that if the result is not winning a playoff series and then going to a game 7 at minimum in the second round, I think it would be the minimum, and you probably only need to win that Kevin Durant won't then ultimately still say, you know what, I still think I'm better off here moving on from this and going somewhere else. Am I correct in reading this room right here as we run our live deadline episode that possibly OG's been on the move?
No, that's
okay.
no.
That's just nonsense riding in the wind there. Good. Because I checked out on Twitter and Woj didn't say anything. But that's the issue here, right? Is making it all in move now to help Kevin Durant. It doesn't guarantee that it keeps you Kevin Durant. That's what the risk is. And I actually realized earlier today, that's the reason why I've been so adamant about you cannot include Claxton in a trade like this, because the future may only be 6 months from now, right? It's not securing your future. It's securing the rest of this season. And I think that is a real legitimate risk.
Yeah. And you also forgot to mention Ben Simmons in your list of players. It's very funny how this is.
And that's, by the way, that's the other biggest problem is you make a move like this, you sacrifice a young talent like Nicholas Claxton, and then you turn around and Ben Simmons is still a problem here. He's still $35 million on the books. So you're also still saddled with that issue that you don't know if you're going to be able to solve. So the Nets have like more than just the one problem, needing to put a talent next to Kevin Durant. They also have this other really big dead weight hanging on their roster right now. So like, it's not a one issue kind of scenario for the Nets, which is what makes it hard for me to like go all in and pull the trigger on someone like Siakam. As much as I would like him, you're sacrificing a lot on the back end.
All right. So here in a second, what we will get into is what could be the possibility for the Nets. Like if this might not be on the table, or if like this one is feeling even a little too far afield because just another big move and it's another sort of ground shifting thing. The question is, what do the Nets do at the trade deadline on Thursday at 3 p.m.? We'll get into that next.
Okay, so let's assume that Kevin Durant isn't going anywhere by the 3 p.m. deadline. Let's also assume that the Brooklyn Nets don't make the big splash trade, and maybe it's because they're unwilling to sacrifice Nicholas Claxton, who is just starting to show the next level of his evolution. Great. Then what do the Nets do? And the question becomes to me, you have Spencer Dinwiddie now. You have Dorian Finney-Smith. This isn't a question. This is a statement. I would try, at a minimum, I would look to potentially shed a contract or two, looking at Joe Harris, even looking at Seth Curry, because even if they do have some short-term value right now in this season, I think you're better off, although you can question what their value is right now. I think you're better off making sure you move that money off the books to help you going into the offseason, as opposed to approaching an offseason where you have 18 in Joe Harris and 35 in Ben Simmons and 8.5 in Seth Curry. At some point, you're going to need to make this money move and work. I might explore those in addition to going out and still trying to acquire another player.
Yeah, look, they shed $8 million in salary or in cap hit with Kessler Edwards the other day, and that opened up a roster. By the way,
paid them money to cover his salary this year and his guaranteed salary next year, something like $2.5 million. But that's why they facilitated it, though.
That was a little bit of a money move. We could see more money moves. They might try to like reduce their cap hit here. It's real. Like if you don't think you're gonna. It's funny about how this works. It's like if you don't think you're gonna win the championship, but might as well start saving some money, right? Because like at that point, like what do you throw? It's throwing good money after bad, and It's a business. And I know no one wants to hear that, but the Edwards thing was for sure a straight up salary dump. I mean, you could kind of talk yourself into the well, it opened up a roster spot. So if they do a 2-for-1 deal, like something like that, there's other ways to kind of spin it. The real spin is that they saved, I'm pretty sure it was $8 million in salary cap hit. We could see other moves like that. Again, if the Nets don't see themselves, as champions this year, then they are going to want to reduce that number. And if they're going to send out a few of these guys, now they can't attach a ton of stuff to it. Like usually with these salary dumps, you actually need to send assets out. And that's why teams like the Spurs are kind of sitting around waiting with just money under the table. Cause look, they'll do this stuff. Like this is what teams do. They can sit around, they have to get to the salary floor anyway. And they can just take your bad contract and take a second round pick or something like that with it and try to get something out of it. They got to spend the money anyway. We could see a deal like that with the Nets. I don't think so. I suspect if it's anything here, I think that, because it's funny. Look, let's look at the team right now as it stands. The team right now as it stands is Durant. I'm not going to go in total order of skill here, but this is good because the problem here is we have not seen this team together, so it can be hard to it could be easy to forget. If everyone is healthy, this is the team: Kevin Durant, Nick Claxton, Ben Simmons, Dorian Finney-Smith, Spencer Dinwiddie. That would probably be something like the starting five, right? Off the bench, Seth Curry, Joe Harris, Cam Thomas, superstar Cam Thomas, and TJ Warren, Royce O'Neal, right? Now, some of those guys have Cam and Royce, those guys have started. That's a really deep, good team. That right there is just a good, very good NBA team, right? There's a lot of depth, a lot of ways to score. They can really defend. They're still missing some size for sure. Probably would like to add still a backup center into that mix. A backup center for the Nets does not win them the championship. It makes them probably a better regular season team, fun team to root for. We can all stop ripping our hair out when they get murdered on the boards every single night, and it'll make a certain segment of this fan feel good. I don't think any of these backup centers are going to make them win the championship, but that team that I just listed right there is a really pretty good team, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a fourth or fifth seed in the East, or something like that, and can win a playoff series. I can make a case that they don't actually need to make tons of moves off that, right? If everything kind of breaks right. So I don't know. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
The only reason I'm listing it out is because, again, we've never seen those guys play together. We have to actually list it out as a reminder. This is what the current team is. And it can be easy to forget because we've been watching Cam Thomas jack up 40 shots a night, but
and loving
that's just not supposed to be it's been amazing. I'm not complaining about it, but that has not been part of that. That's not the plan.
Well, so no. And so I think, first of all, it is a good exercise because what it reminds you is, and listen, even take Ben Simmons out of the equation, just because even when healthy, his play has not been good enough. Everybody else that you listed there, even with some inconsistencies with Joe and Seth, whatever, that's a very deep team. That's a team with players that have roles that on a game-to-game basis, the matchups you can start to create are really good. The second unit can have a lot of firepower in it, right? There's a lot of things that you can feel good about. And we talked about this over those last handful of games where it was hey, they're not winning against the Clippers or against the Suns, but they're also going toe-to-toe with them, missing their superstar, missing other key pieces, having injuries throughout this roster. So I think there is the world where the volatility of the Kyrie Irving trade, just of that kind of upheaving the season, all of a sudden gets the wheels turning on everything when maybe it doesn't need to. Right? Maybe it's okay. That was absolutely brutal. We still got back pieces. And the way that you described it, starting lineup, we actually came in and potentially went ahead and said we inserted 2 starting members to our lineup and then get to move a Royce, right? Move other guys into the second unit where they can be just as valuable or not more so when it comes to different matchups. So there is a world where this team is still a viable playoff team. I'm not going to put them past the second round, but you do want to see what it is. The hard part for me, I think what we can close out on is
real quick. Sorry, yeah, I went 29 minutes and didn't interrupt you once. I don't think. Maybe I did, but I'm gonna interrupt you real quick.
Perfect.
I will say, if we shift our expectations around just a little bit around that team, right? Around that team that we just mentioned, and let's say we swap a Curry and a pick or Harris and a pick and bring back a functional big. Okay, I think that's a real thing. We could. I think it's a real thing the Nets could do here. I think that I don't know who that exact guy is. I mean, the guys like Vanderbilt are out the door. People said PJ Washington. I don't know. I think there's guy Mo Bamba. Obviously, there you go. Everyone drink. I said
maybe
Mo Bamba.
Naz Reid still becomes a thing that could happen.
Right. If we shift our I hate to do this, but if we shift our expectations a little bit, yeah, I don't think that team wins a championship. What that team would be is a team that like the first and second seed would not want to face in the first round.
Right.
And if you start to, I'm not trying to make the Nets the plucky underdog here. Like they don't deserve, they definitely don't deserve that thing. But I think they for sure would now be a team that there's just no chance like you would want to face in the first round. Durant, like angry Durant going into the playoffs with like something to prove, with the team like on his back a little bit, and a bunch of like really, really capable role players who can defend the hell out of the ball and shoot and have some spacing. And if Simmons can come back to like anything, like no one's going to want to face that team. I don't think they're going to the championship, but we could talk ourselves into a fun playoff run. So I don't know. I think it's interesting to think about this team. And I think maybe one other lower level move to swap out a shooter for like sort of a functional big.
And it's worth noting too, Spencer Dinwiddie, a lot of playoff experience. Dorian Finney-Smith with the Mavs, playoff experience. You talk about looking at obviously Kevin Durant. When you look inside the roster, with Kyrie gone, there's not a ton of like high leverage experience for this roster. So, and then Royce O'Neal, who they got with Utah, a lot of playoff experience, right? So like you can paint a picture where there are guys that are having success right now and can also have success for them going forward. So I don't hate that. The last thing I did just want to mention is that I think the one frustrating thing potentially for the fan base is that that trade from the Lakers is like, hey, we figured it out. You know what I mean?
How did they do that?
Saddled with this Russell Westbrook contract. How could you possibly, whatever? They figured it out and they got significantly better. And when you go look at, the Timberwolves and stacking a lot of draft capital and stuff, like they're figuring things out in a different vein. Utah, excuse me. They're figuring things out in a different way. But the Lakers made that happen. And they only had 2 first-round picks to play with in all this operating. So I will say, like, that I think is the piece where you go, well, if they were able to do it and they're willing to push their chips all in, different in the West where it's wide open. But I think that's a little bit of what the fan base is going to be clamoring for at the deadline, saying, hey, it's all good if you couldn't go make the massive trade. But a couple of tweaks could get you across the line. It's what you mentioned. And this is, I will say that, the Caruso conversation, hey, it's going to be a haul, whatever. If that ends up becoming available and it's 2 first-round picks to get this guy, that might be. That's not the epic move we're talking about, but that's a really nice extra little move to make to maybe change the tide here a little bit over the back end of the season. So it's fascinating, man. And I think that the Nets, Kevin Durant, the organization, I think everybody legitimately are all thinking about the short and long-term futures for individuals and for the team. And that makes it tricky to try to make a all-in decision or any significant decision at this deadline.
All right, we're going to break off the podcast here. We've got a ton of people in YouTube here leading into the trade deadline. We see all of you. Much appreciated. The podcast will stop, but then the live YouTube will go. If you have some questions, definitely throw them into chat. We're gonna break down this Lakers trade a little bit too, because we didn't. Yeah. That was a non-pod thing. Make sure that you are subscribed to Locked On Nets YouTube. We are just about at 5,000 subscribers. We're hoping, let's get there can we get there by the deadline? I think it's close. We're under 100 away to go. Can we get there by the trade deadline? That'll be our own little trade deadline. Get us to 5,000 YouTube subscribers. Be part of it. Much appreciated for everyone that's jumped in here. We will continue on YouTube in a second. And for the podcast, make sure you jump over on YouTube yourself.
Hey, I'm just going to say he looks like a deranged Easter bunny. That's the old man from the Christmas Story, because RIP to the actress who played the mother. She unfortunately did not have any distinctive lines.
Melinda Dillon, she didn't have any distinctive lines. How dare you, sir? How dare you? She has some great lines. Ralphie, the soap, the conversation about where you learn the word. My goodness, we're a little late on the Christmas Story. Anyway, one of the all-time great poets, RIP Melinda Dillon. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
All right, my friends, the podcast. Yeah, I couldn't track one down. I wanted to get a good one for her as we just talk about our closing quotes to the episode.
You'll shoot your eye out would have been the line, by the way. But
is that her? Is that the mother that says that?
They all say it at some point.
I guess you're probably right. You know what, guys? That's me. That's on me. Shout out to Clash Bandicoot, who pointed out first interruption of the episode earlier. Really appreciate that. Couldn't get you up on the screen there, but I saw you. You're doing the good tracking.
I was really good. Let me go through this. Let me go through this.
Yeah. So I'm curious
because it's the live part. We get a little looser here. Gonna go through this Lakers and Minnesota trade. Because I gotta say, the Lakers, I was like stumbling during the podcast when we did this because I was like floored at what they got. So, okay, so Lakers got D'Angelo Russell, Jared Vanderbilt, and Malik Beasley. All three of those guys could like possibly start for the Lakers. Like getting out, like replacing Schroeder, replacing Thomas Bryant, replacing whoever they've been, Troy Brown, who they've been playing at the three. So like that three guys could all start almost definitely. Westbrook goes to the Jazz. Love it there. He's had like multiple clashes with with the fan base there, so that should be fun. They might just try to buy him out or sit him out and go fully into the tank. I'm not sure what they're going to do here. Get David Locke on to figure out what the situation is there, but they get one of the Lakers picks, not both. Only one of the Lakers picks came along with that, and it's top 1 through 4 protected. So like, I don't know. That's kind of great. And then finally, and then the Wolves, sorry, real quick, and then we'll finish it. The Wolves get Mike Conley, Nickeil Walker-Alexander, and picks. I don't know what the Wolves are doing, but maybe the Wolves got one of those Lakers picks. Like, I don't really know what happened here. So it's just confusing. It feels like unless I'm missing something, it feels like the Lakers just completely crushed this trade. But I don't know. Like, it depends probably what you think about D'Angelo Russell, but D'Angelo Russell, if he's like your third best player or fourth best player or something like that, like, I don't know, spot up shooting, secondary ball creation off of LeBron, like that's pretty good. Like the Lakers might be really good now.
I'm gonna tell you. Well, here's what I'm gonna tell you. What did you think about the Lakers playoff outlook before this trade? Not much.
It was like bad. It was probably like bad. They were lost again last night. The team looked like, I mean, they had to trade Westbrook, right? He just got in a fight with Darvin Ham. They got in a fight with Darvin Ham at halftime of the game where LeBron's about to break the scoring record. Like what are we doing here?
Westbrook was also the only reason they almost came back in that game, though. You know what I mean? It's hilarious.
Yeah, he was really good in the fourth quarter. I know.
But my point being is like, you made a move sacrificing minimal capital to make yourself significantly better. Like, this isn't, if you isolate Dorian Finney-Smith and Spencer Dinwiddie, hey, that makes this team better. Oh, but you also traded Kyrie Irving to get them, right? Like there's the Nets, I'm lost for words here because that seems like on the surface, such a good deal for the Lakers. And they improved so significantly that they legitimately now in the Western Conference, you look and say, hey, those guys are a threat. They can be a threat now when you reconstruct that roster. If Anthony Davis decides that he doesn't hate LeBron James, we're not entirely sure what's going on there either. But then that does bring you back to the Brooklyn Nets and say, okay, it doesn't even need to be Siakam. But this makes me feel like something can be done here. Like something can be done here if this 3-team deal was capable of going down.
Yeah, I mean, they have to extend D'Angelo Russell. Like it could be a rental here, right? He's an expiring. So there's a world where he expires and they kind of get nothing for him. My guess is like that's a good situation for him, and maybe they're able to extend him, right? Yeah. Like, and he's one of the guys they can bring in and under the money. Like he's definitely not a max player or anything like that. It's interesting. So I don't know. That it does give me sort of hope that they're going to do it. Like obviously the Lakers were this big piece that like they had to package the first round pick with it and all this other stuff. There's a part of this I don't really understand what Minnesota's doing, but they probably just trying to recoup anything for D'Lo at this point. Just because if he's going to walk, then they need to take something back. Maybe they try to spin Conley tomorrow or something like that, right? Like just right back at it and try to, because I think that they've figured out that experiment's not really working with with the way their team is going this year, and Towns has been hurt a ton and whatever. But yeah, just really, really interesting. And I'm kind of like, now I'm thinking there's like no way that Westbrook plays for the Jazz. So I think that's either going to be buyout or sit it out situation. And anyone that's suggesting that he's not coming to Brooklyn.
That was the first thing. Like when the trade go, like, but this is the funny version of it.
No chance.
This was the joke version of it. He gets bought out by Utah. The Nets sign him in for like a veteran minimum, and he helps Brooklyn win a chip. Like that was the comedic, the comedic arc of that timeline. And no, that's not going to be the case. This is a hard one for me to answer right now from Clash. The idea, like if you get some mid-level pieces like the Lakers did, not Toronto, not Chicago, like where are the Nets looking for this? I know like the Mo Bambas of the world and that kind of stuff, but like, is there a name out there that really hasn't been talked about that like gets on the table now based on how things maybe like there's not a lot of teams that, because the Timberwolves are unique. like you mentioned about, it's an expiring contract for Russell. They didn't necessarily get it all to come together this year after making the massive trade for Gobert. Cat's been out. Like, you need kind of the sweet spot of a team that had a lot of big expectations and can't ride out the rest of the year. If that team was playing better, then they would have ridden out with D'Angelo Russell thinking like, hey, we'll see how it goes in the playoffs. And if we lose him, we lose him. But that never materialized. I'm trying to think if there's another team that's like going through that same thing right now. And Chicago is one of them, but I don't think that they're a team that's going to pull the trigger.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And I think that the Nets are like in this weird spot again where like they're just built like to be kind of deep, but like nothing's all that, like they don't have like any amazing piece to send along outside of Claxton. You kind of want to keep him because he's young, and like they can't, it's not like they can tank really, so they're not going to do that. Like they're just kind of in this weird spot. And by the way, it's not lost to me that like Nets fans are definitely losing their minds that Westbrook plus this pick is more than the Nets could get for Kyrie. Right? Like, I'm not sure about that, by the way. Like, Dinwiddie and DFS, like, I'm not sure if expiring D'Angelo Russell at $37 million plus Vanderbilt plus Beasley is like better than Dinwiddie, Dorian Finney-Smith and a first. Like, I still, the Nets package is still better than that.
Yeah,
like,
I'll cut you off. You know what I mean? Watch this. Cut you off, Doug. No, but like the idea of like, say Spencer Dinwiddie is just available on the market. The idea of saying like, we're going to send a first round pick for Spencer Dinwiddie, like any team. Yeah, like that could have been a scenario, right? In a matching salary or maybe something lower, whatever. That wouldn't be unforeseen. So just if you're talking about the Kyrie package, you can also view it as, well, Dorian Finney-Smith is worth a couple of second-round picks, and Dinwiddie is maybe worth a first-round pick. You combine it all together. Like, it is the totality of it. That doesn't make me lose my mind just so much as what can the Nets try to accomplish in this closeout. You know what name I'll bring up? Not because I'm saying whatever, but the way it's been reported is that the Atlanta Hawks and John Collins, like, it's like they want to get off of this dude. That to me, if we're thinking about the Lakers and what they did, it's a 3-team scenario where you're dumping Ben Simmons somewhere and you're bringing in John Collins. Like, that would, to me, be in the realm of that type of discussion, like what the Lakers just did, where it doesn't cost you nearly as much capital on Collins because Atlanta wants him done. He is under contract, but I think he has the opt-out coming up too.
Yeah, I mean, this guy's been on the trade block for like 3 years now. I don't know.
And I'm not saying it's my ideal. It's just that
Collins is, just to clarify, Collins is under contract for 2 more years with a player option for the 4th year. Like he's
still a ways away. Okay.
You got a lot of if you're trading for John Collins, you got a lot of John Collins coming. So
and this is painting the bad picture, the worst picture. Then the Siakam all in and then KD leaves. The trade for John Collins and then Kevin Durant leaves is equally or more terrifying.
And just one note, and this has been widely reported here, and so like I'm not the first to notice this, but John Collins, he screwed his finger up last year, and this year he's shooting 26% from 3. Like he just can't shoot anymore, and so like that would really scare. I think that's like affected probably his trade market too. Is that he's shooting 26% from 3? Like that doesn't work on the Nets at all. So I think that like that version of it, and by the way, it could be directly tied to like this finger injury that he had last season where he all of a sudden can't do it anymore. So I would be very, very concerned about a situation like that.
It's not that we'll talk more seriously, but if you could 1-to-1 have 4 years of Collins making 20 to 25 million with a weird finger, or Ben Simmons at 3 years for 35+ million, like it's like, hey, neither one of them is really working for anybody here. Maybe I'd rather have to lower the salary number.
The Simmons thing is such a beat because it's funny too, because we kind of talked about it briefly in the podcast, but we are in a spot where when we mention the team, like we don't even mention him. Right. And like
in the network group meeting where we're talking about, I was like, Doug and I have been talking about rotations and not including Ben Simmons, like just leaving him off the list because you're just thinking about viable, productive players.
And no one says anything either. So it's not even like, it's not like believe me, comments, and we have tons of thousands of people listen to this thing. Like no one even comments it. Like no one even, like when we leave him off the list, because there's just sort of just like, you kind of forget about him. The only time he gets brought back up is to get traded because you want to get off his salary, or, there's very few, let me put it this way. There's very few Ben Simmons stands still out there right now. And we want him to be good. The Nets kind of need him to be good. They need him to be like, and it's weird too, because like statistically, there is a little bit of a disconnect between sort of like the Nets plus minus and stuff when he's on the court and what your eye tells you, which is like what is going on here.
This is when you trumped me on those numbers when we were talking. You're like, well, the on-off numbers with Ben Simmons, and like I didn't even say it at the time. I was like, yeah, but the eye test tells me that can't be totally correct. Like it just can't be.
It's so weird. It's so weird. I mean, the defense I think is still okay, and I think that like that's still going there. He had one play. I meant to mention this. He had one play that I've been meaning to go back and clip. He's on a mini break where it's like a 3-on-2, or maybe it's like even a 3-on-3 with a kind of a mini trailer. And he looked like, how would I describe it? He looked like Mahomes in the shotgun running a handoff to like Pacheco, because he just basically tried to hand it to the guy next to him, whoever it was. And it just got instantly intercepted, right? Because it's just like not what you do. And the other night too, that was last game. That was against the Suns. And there was another time where Chris Paul picked his pocket because Chris Paul knew, he's like, this dude's not shooting. So he just went after him like he was going for the dribble because he knew that he was never going to go to the basket. It's like these little things. I'm going to go find that clip. But it was like, I saw that and I was like, oh my God, man. Like he's literally handing it off to another player to go shoot the ball while they're on a break together. It's really a bummer.
And that's the difference between like, especially on the offensive end, it's, he may be defensively sound right now, but how much is it hampering? Like that's not the offensive play, right? Like it's not the scheme is not. And then as the guard passes you just kind of shovel it into his hands and then stand and occupy space because you don't have a functional role inside of the offense. So it is disruptive on that end as well. It's why you heard that Kevin Durant has certainly been frustrated with him. This was coming out of this Phoenix game as well. They were talking to him about, 26 minutes, 2 points. It's been a process, Ben Simmons said, just getting back out there and trying to find some rhythm, but it felt good. Just give to the team any way I can, Simmons said, who twisted his ankle as well, trying to guard DeAndre Ayton. He said it's sore, but it'll be fine. He referenced in these quotes coming out of this game too about how it's going to take specifically the knee, which we've talked about. I've got to stay on the knee. I still have a long way to go in terms of physical self and getting where I need to be. That will take time. And he went on to say about how it's directly connected the knee to the back surgery and the issue. It's not an excuse for him. I think it's just we were led to believe that Ben Simmons was 100% healthy coming into this year. He's not. Then there's also the mental component to it. But I just think that that's what's holding everything up here, is that he's offensively having incredible issues, and he physically, if he's 70%, I would be amazed. And that doesn't mean when he's 100%, he's going to be any better for this team, but it's the worst of all worlds, especially after you trade Kyrie and you want to be able to look to Ben to say, hey, this is where you can pick up some of that slack.
Yeah, and it's just going to be, and if time is time, that's just what it's going to be. He's not getting traded here. There's just no world where that's going to happen. And so I can say that I feel pretty definitive about that. The money's a total.
Starting him when Kevin Durant's healthy? Do you not start him? Like, do you take him out of the, I said this going back a ways, right around where his functionality was. Take away the number of his salary, say that, hey, he can be a defensive stopper, pick up certain assignments, be a rotational player inside of that second unit. It doesn't matter anymore. You're paying him the money. So why the ceremonial? And that's why we got to play you 30 minutes if you're healthy and available to go. I would create the right rotations that make the most sense around Kevin Durant. And if Ben Simmons can't work his way into being a bigger part of it, so be it.
Yeah, I think that I would. Okay. So,
and I don't mean no role. I just, the right.
Yeah,
role.
I think I would start him for a couple of reasons. One is because I think he has considerably more upside than anyone else you would start over him, right? Like, I think other players probably have a higher floor, but in whatever function they have, not his exact function, but let's just say like basketball writ large, like, there's other players that have a higher floor. I think he still has a higher ceiling just because of certain like physical attributes he has. The vision I still think is great. I think that like the defense is still very good and well above average, if not great at times, when he can really be focused. And I still think that the upside is such that you should plus the money. Like if you're trying to recoup any value, right? If you're trying to like ever envision a world where you could even sell him at like 50 cents on the dollar, right? Like, or he just hits the upside that he can do. I don't think it's coming all the way back, but I think the upside is such that you probably still have to, at least for the time being, go with it. I don't think you can write him off. So like, let's compare him to like other bad salaries, other bad contracts that are like, were considered dead weight. Let's like Westbrook, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like Westbrook, he's older. It's been hard for him to fit in. The skills have declined. He's not going to be around the league a lot longer. Like, I don't think we're in Russell Westbrook territory with where Ben Simmons is, or like John Wall. I'm trying to think of these, like, these guys for a while that were really bad contracts that were just super lead weights. Blake was like this with the Pistons, right? Simmons is still 26. There's still a world where sitting him, I just don't think makes sense, because I don't think you can. I think you have to not write him off. Like, and I think if the upside ever got there, it would make the team really, really good. So I think from that standpoint, no, I wouldn't. I don't think, but I get why you would think about it, but I just think you have to just stick with it. I think you have to just hope that it gets better, and that you hope that mentally it comes back and physically it comes all the way back. And like, he's some version of what he used to be, because he's just still too young, and we know the talent's there. And it might just doing that might be tough. I don't know.
Yeah, and let me clarify it too. It's like it's going to Ben Simmons and saying, "Listen, man, we believe you're going to get back to that place, but you're not there right now. So we're going to take that pressure off of you. You're not starting. We're still going to play 15, 20, 25 minutes a game, whatever it looks like, but we're just not going to make it that we're playing you as a starter in the starting rotation, and the success of this team this season in particular is dependent on you." Because yes, like, do I think he can get back to some version of himself? Yes. But we are 3/4 of the way through the year. It's hard to think that he's going to get there this year, right? Like that's more my point. It looks like physically he needs another offseason to be able to continue to rehab and to not be playing every other night and playing basketball games, real physical minutes, right? Like, that seems to be the indication. And the other thing, while he's the age, the upside is still better than a Russell Westbrook, than a John Wall. But like Russell Westbrook, okay, the dude is not the guy that you want on your team, especially making $47 million. But also, he's still a functional basketball player. Like, you can make the case that Ben Simmons is like, he's just not a functional basketball player right now.
I think that's going. I'll interrupt you. I think that's going a little far. I think the problem with him is, I get what you're saying. The numbers still, like, the on-off stuff is still good enough. Like, it still is there. I think, yes, I agree with you. The eye test isn't all the way there. I think what we end up doing a little bit, I'm definitely guilty of this, is we combine the salary with what he's doing, right, into like one idea around him. And when you do that, then it feels really non-functional.
Okay, but take away the salary.
If we just took
right
all players. If we just took all players in the NBA, removed their salaries, and had them on the court, like, I think, yeah, he's still functionally a basketball player. I think that,
but I'm saying, like, take away, he's Bob Boblaw. Is he starting? Would you be starting him with the stat lines and the eye test?
No.
That's what I mean. That's what I mean.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is now, but I'm going to add another thing. Now what I'm going to add is, yeah, I agree with you. If we just did that now, probably not. It'd be close, but probably not. But now what we have to do is we now have to just use a few priors here and go back and say, we have seen it a different version though, because so once we do that, like, then you have to, like, still keep dreaming on it a little bit, right? Like, and that's like the one difference. I agree with you. If we just all got dropped in from outer space now and just started watching it with no numbers and no names in the back and no stats and nothing else, yes, I agree with you. But you can't 100% look through that lens, because you have to use some past performance stuff at some point. If you want to ever recoup the talent, if you ever want to try to hit or recoup the asset, if you ever want to hit some upside, like, to ever trade them, like, we do understand other things about it. It's close. I get what you're saying. I just didn't want to call him like a non-functional basketball player. I don't think that's
no. And I would say a non-starting basketball player right now. He's a contributing member on a basketball team, but he's just not the guy that you'd be plugging in. And ironically, this is like when we talked about the Nets And with Kevin Durant and with Kyrie Irving and saying, like, what is the ceiling for them? When we had the discussion, it's like, ultimately, I got to the place where I was like, well, I have the sample size. It's what this experience has been. So even though all indications would be, yes, they can achieve winning a championship, everything tells me that they're not going to because of what I'm seeing. Ben Simmons might get there, but everything I've seen so far this season suggests he won't get there this year. Again, that's what it's really, this is about this year. I actually am someone who thinks you get to this offseason, come back around next year, if he's still on this roster, I actually won't be surprised if he looks far closer to what he once was than what he's been so far. So, I mean, it will be fascinating. And by the way, there's not a big risk of like anything happening around him because there's really no value right now when it comes to Ben Simmons. Any other questions, anybody? Because I didn't think we were going to go down that Simmons hole. Good to keep this stuff off the podcast. I don't think anyone would have wanted to hear this at the trade deadline talking Ben Simmons, but
yeah, I was just looking. Sorry, got a text there. Just looking real quick to see if anyone any questions. We'll probably do like 5 more minutes and probably break out of here. Adam will be around if there is any Nets breaking news. Adam, I think, will be holding this fort down tomorrow a little bit more than I will be. Maybe you'll get like a on the road, Doug. But I'm not sure it's going to be more than that. Just because I screwed something up with my schedule. But if anyone has any final questions here or comments, we can throw them up. I was just scrolling to see if there was anything, but I think a lot of this stuff is like we talked about this one a while. Oh, sorry. This one we talked about Nurkic and we talked about Nurk. I didn't think it was Adam liked this one a little bit more than I did. I don't think the Nets. I think you're hard pressed to throw a first round pick with him and try to pair him with Claxton. I think that would be not really a pairing that would work because I think you just sending out assets to cannibalize minutes off of like one of your best players, I think would be something I personally wouldn't be interested in. I think they need to have a little more flexibility. You can't be a straight 5 at this point. I think like sending out like real stuff for an only 5 would be pretty tough. I don't.
And he's bad defensively too, which is
it needs to be like someone like it needs to be like a bigger 4 that can like space the floor a little bit and. Unless you're just playing like want someone to play backup center minutes, which I get people want right now. But I don't think that's what you're getting with Nurkic. So I don't think
I'll just address this one of like best trades we can make without giving up Clax or Cam. It's a pick or 2 and a salary match for the Mo Bambas, the Naz Reeds, like the names that you've heard or whatever. Like that's the way you can do. You don't have to give up anybody to go get one of those players. It's only if you try to get to. I can't keep using ones we said before, but it's like say you're talking to Chicago about Caruso. Well, if you want to trade Cam Thomas to Chicago, they can get excited about what Cam Thomas has shown and what his ceiling can be. And that can reduce what the ask is from draft capital, and you could look at it like that. Like that's the way that you can go about getting up to the next tier of players. But I honestly too, it's been mentioned the last couple of days too. Will Barton looks like that's going towards the buyout. And there's been some connections to Brooklyn. Like we said this going back a ways. Even before that was before the Kyrie trade, but that like the buyout market was probably going to be waters that the Nets might be in because I think it is kind of the all or nothing scenario. It's the big home run swing or it's the marginal move. And that's like, again, to Doug's point about looking over the roster and the talent they have, like the marginal move is okay. Like the marginal move can be okay and can be functional here as long as your expectations aren't, we want the Nets to compete for a title this year with Kevin Durant. Then you're never going to get home on that expectation, I don't think.
Just real quick, Jonathan, we covered this when this episode posts. We do this. We did 10 minutes on this earlier on the thing. So if you're jumping into the stream now, we did an entire thing. It probably starts at like the 11-minute mark or something like that on the podcast. So once this is done in live or off of live, you can go and check that out. We did, like I said, right around the 11 or 12-minute mark. We do almost an entire segment on that Siakam question.
And I'll say after we do the deadline coverage tomorrow, like I'll be in and around. If anything breaks, YouTube live, I'll be in. I'll cover it for everybody. And Doug will be, driving with one hand, talking on his phone, set up the video, all that good stuff. But after this, like on the back end of the trade deadline, I think probably one of our next episodes we'll get a little sample between now and the start. Will we get one game? We'll get a game with Dorian Finney-Smith and like Dinwiddie, right, on their schedule.
Yeah, they're supposed to play. I think they're supposed to play tomorrow. Like they're either going to be traded tomorrow or they're going to play tomorrow. Right. So I think that. I think
one of our next ones, though, I think we'll be setting our expectations for the rest of this season, right? So we'll get a little look at a couple of these players. The other thing that we didn't get to, we've mentioned this, but remember the Kevin Durant injury timeline got pushed back again here a little ways. And that does become interesting too, because the Nets were a 4 seed. Now they're a 5 seed. It does start to matter how long he's out and how far they fall, which will make seeing Dinwiddie and Dorian Finney-Smith, where they plug in and how they help these rotations. That's going to matter a lot in terms, like, they need to be winning basketball games here. Like, they cannot continue to go with now what is a 5-9 or 6-9, something like that, without Kevin Durant. Like, they got to stack a couple of wins and tread some water here. So it'll be interesting.
All right, a couple of just housekeeping things. One, Kyrie Irving going to make his Dallas Mavericks debut, so best of luck, whatever. And then if you're just showing up in the YouTube right now, things that it's going to be worth it to go back and check. We covered a ton on this episode. We talked Nets, what the situation with Kevin Durant was going to be. We talked about, what we would think about, a Siakam Toronto trade, like what that could possibly look like for the Nets. We covered what the rotation is going to look like if they don't make any moves here, like with Dinwiddie, because I can see people asking these questions. So I just want to say, like, go back and listen to this, the rest of this episode. We covered a ton of this already, like the possible rotations. We did talk about the Lakers trade with Russell, with D'Lo, and all these other guys.
We don't need you, buddy. We don't need you, pal.
Adios. And then don't need you, don't want you, unsubscribe. So so we cover all that stuff leading into this. So if you're just jumping in now, because I can see we have like tons and hundreds of people in here right now. If you're just coming in, we did cover a ton on this episode already. So definitely go back, rewind it, check it out. Make sure you also hit subscribe to Locked On Nets. Going to try to get us to 5,000. It'd be great to get to 5,000 before the trade deadline so I can rest easy. I've set the trade deadline now as when I feel like this should happen. So if it doesn't happen, then I'm just going to I'll have lost my own trade deadline kind of thing. We're 75 people away. So go in right now. If you're in the chat or you haven't done it, subscribe to Locked On Nets YouTube.
We're trading really good content for subscribers at the deadline. That's what we're doing. So be a part of that. And
that's a really good trade. It's totally free for you out there. So hit like and subscribe to YouTube. We will be back. If anything breaks tomorrow for the trade deadline, or today, if you're listening to it, we will be on here live covering every piece of information, even the smallest deal that's gonna be going down at Locked On Nets. And obviously, we'll be covering you the rest of the season for your Brooklyn Nets. We'll be back again tomorrow and the days after that, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.